When I first read Greta Gerwig's comments that you and her, quote-unquote, went shopping for Maggie together,
Yes.
I first read that as a metaphor of the two of you setting out together to find the character, and then I realized it was probably a literal comment.
Yes.
So did you two shop for Maggie's clothes and furniture and
Yes.
such?
Well, really one of our first trips together was going to a shop where I had seen some clothes that I thought might be good for Maggie, and we bought her, I bought her a little dress, this checked yellowish kind of gold dress that had buttons all the way down it. It was almost like a flannel shirt but long, and we ended up using it in a movie. I think she appears in it once, and it was like a little, it was kind of a symbolic gesture of beginning and our kind of aesthetic melding really that happened.
What else did you do to quote-unquote shop for Maggie together, or in other words, discover the character in tandem?
Well, she and I would meet in her apartment. She has a small apartment in the West Village that is so like Maggie's apartment in the film, with lots of books in one room and kind of old moldings, and it's perfect. And so we would sit there and talk about things, every aspect of her, so that we knew her quite deeply by the end. For example, one conversation would have been like, you know, there's something almost, she's almost in a strange way like a saint. Even though she keeps making wrong decisions, she's very ethically motivated. And then we started talking about how perhaps there was a spiritual background to it. And then we talked about, well, maybe, is she a Quaker? We both went to Quaker services to kind of go see, separately. And then we thought, yeah, that'd be great if she was a Quaker. Okay, so she's a Quaker. These are things that, even though I had written the film and the book, the character, when she came on board, by the time we actually shot, it had been kind of molded to her much more.
So talk to me about Maggie's psychology. I think many, if not most, can relate to this sort of control freak tendency, this thought that we can make things the way that we feel they should be or the way that we want them, and that everything will be better for everybody involved. There's a kind of harmonic altruism, but also selfishness about that attitude. And then the matter of, as you said, ethical compromises that she might have to make in the service of this greater good. So anyway, how did you see her kind of, on the one hand and on the other hand, in terms of trying to influence other people's lives or master her own?
Well, I think that because she's somebody that is very good at helping other people realize their dreams. That's her job in college. And when she needs a job, that's what she does. You want to be a novelist? Let me make your life possible. Let me make it possible for you to be a novelist. I know what's best for you. There's this sort of feeling like when people sometimes mean well, they look at someone else and they think, oh my God, you're so close to being what you want to be. Let me help you do that. Yeah. The only problem is these kind of meddlings very often lead to mistakes. And I think that she makes one mistake after another, but with the best possible intentions. So one of the reasons I think that Greta is so wonderful in this part is that she takes what could have been a manipulative character and really makes her adorable. And even Georgette, who says, who really can't bear her and throws her out of her house in the beginning, but in the end she says, I can't help it, I like you. Because she's literally disarming. I think she is the essence of disarming.
My favorite line in the film is, the squeaky wheel gets the grease and the cactus never gets watered. Is that line your own invention?
Actually, it's a combination, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease was in there. And then early on when we were talking about the script, Greta said, what about the cactus never gets watered? And so I put them both in. I said, oh, let's just use both of them. So that's an example of a combination of the two of us. Yeah. And it was the idea of, like, sometimes in a relationship, the person who's really great sport ends up sort of not getting anything, and the powder gets everything. And this is like where she's like, what's going on?
I think it also gets to a kind of central theme that you've talked about, the film being about, this idea of interdependence. And New York City is sort of like the capital of dependent people, independent people.
Yes.
And I think it's also a place of great community, but people might sort of get used to the idea that I can do this on my own, and yet your film tells us, well, it's much more important to also be able to work with others and help others and have them help you?
I think that in this moment, which is very much a moment where as individuals we're saying, oh, the rule book has been thrown out in terms of relationships. We can be married or we cannot be married. Women are saying, I can have a baby by myself or with you. I can be with you for a certain amount of time, then change. I can be economically independent. So the whole idea of coupling and how you couple, in a way, is going through this intense change. And so I think it's a period where the clan or the larger group becomes very important.
It takes a village?
Yeah. That really, when you think about it, if somebody gets sick or is incapacitated, somebody comes in and helps. If somebody breaks up with somebody else, it's that kind of thing of clan thinking. And that's in a way what I think is the most powerfully hopeful thing about the film in the end.
Partly the film is also a satire of the academic elite, of the artistic or creative community and hipster culture. Again, New York City's ground zero for these things. We get these slightly nonsensical anthropology courses like fictocritical perspectives of family dynamics and masks in the modern family from Victorian times to the present. The book titles like Rituals of Commodity Fetishism at the Tail End of the Empire, and of course, my favorite in the background, the sign that refers to handcrafted pickles, which is also slightly nonsensical. These are only mild exaggerations, perhaps, but what were you hoping to kind of get at with these?
Well, you know, the truth is that a lot of people think I made up fictocritical anthropology, but of course I didn't. It's a thriving method of thinking, of academic strand, and there's some great thinkers working in that field. You know, I guess for me, life is fundamentally absurd, and so really not just academics, but we all have absurd elements to us. You know, I love the absurdity of their language, of the way that they put things. I understand how it makes sense, but of course, from a lay perspective, it's so exaggerated that it doesn't make sense. But yet, these people, I love the tension of the fact that these people are going through things that anybody could understand. You know, everybody understands their dilemmas and their problems in their marriages and stuff, and yet they're also in this very rarefied world.
So one thing I'm curious about is to what extent you were giving thought to the film's relationship with, or relationship to and upending of the conventions of romantic comedy.
Well, you know, I did watch a lot of classic screwball romantic comedies, Preston Sturges movies, or Philadelphia Story, or some of the classic remarriage comedies as well, which is a genre in itself. And I was interested in how to make it modern. How do we make that modern? And I think that because it's a form which is very joyous and very satisfying. To watch sort of smart people messing up is a really satisfying thing to do. To feel like you're having pleasure but also having your brain fed is a really satisfying thing. I was interested in what happens really when you get everything you wanted, and it happens within the first 20 minutes of the movie, and then the rest of life has to happen. So, yeah, I mean, I was aware of that without being kind of academically aware, if you know what I mean.
Let's go back a little bit to the origins of the project. It comes from, the kernel of it is this Karen Rinaldi story, right? How did that story come to you, and how did it evolve once it got into your hands?
Well, Karen Rinaldi, who's a publisher and a novelist, somebody that I've known for years because she's the mother of my son's best friend. So she sent it to me knowing that I was looking for a comic book, a comedic story to set in New York City. She said, I don't know, I have a feeling one of the strands of my novel could be good. So she sent me only the Maggie chapters, in which there was the hook of what happens when, you know, you realize your husband's perfect for his ex-wife and try to get them back together. And you had this triangle of John, Georgette, and Maggie. And I loved it. I showed it to David Cardesis, who's my producing partner. Then I went to Rachel Horowitz, who I'd known for years, and I'd never worked with her as a producer, but I sort of thought, well, what would you think of it? She loved it. And so we started to sort of talk and build it out, and I had a lot of conversations with Rachel and with Karen Rinaldi. Just to as I wrote versions, because even though I had the hook and the central elements, I needed to build it out into a full film. This was only a part of Karen's novel. And so building it out, I ended up injecting, you know, Tony and Felicia, the Bill Hader and Maya Rudolph characters, also the Travis Fimmel character of the Pickle Man, and kind of injecting a lot of things from my own life and from my own experience, and making it more and more personal. And in fact, you know, the idea of fictocritical anthropology is something that I put in there because my best friend, who's a professor at NYU, said, you know, this John character sounds so much like Michael Taussig, and who is a great fictocritical anthropologist. And so I started learning about that, and then I started that was great. And in fact, one of the speeches Georgette gives when she's in the auditorium is lifted directly from my friend's paper. So I was trying to be as authentic as I could in terms of like really being serious about these people. And in fact, generally I find that that's good, is to just do it for real and not just make stuff up, and maybe heighten it just a little.
Right.
And that in itself is actually funnier than if you just sort of try to be absurd and funny.
And what's the status of Karen's book? Has it been published, or?
It's going to be published, I think, next spring. It's called The End of Men.
Okay. It's interesting to have kind of these parallel tracks that emerge from the same story. I'm sure the novel's very different from the film.
It is. I mean, I never read the whole novel. I only read the Maggie chapters, and like as I said, there were no friends, and there was no Pickle Man, and the plot was different, and the world actually was a little bit different, but the heart was there, and yeah, it's lovely, and I think that part of the reason that she's finished it and now is going to publish it is because we made it. So it's a really nice, it's a nice little sprinkling fairy dust on things. It's good.
Yeah. About the music, I gather that the scheme there was to sort of have a style of music for each character. Can you talk about how that evolved? Or am I misreading that?
You know what, it may end up having been that. It was a little bit less schematic than that. There's the scored music, which was Michael Orhatton, this is my 5th film with him. We talked a lot about, okay, what is this music? How do we create a sound which is right for this film, which has the lightness but also the seriousness of it, and that I always wanted quite a big score, like quite a robust score. We listened to a lot of French films, a lot of Truffaut films, like really lush, yeah, exactly, that sort of sense, no apologies, and this is gonna, like, we're really going for it in this score. And yet we also used a lot of unusual instruments, like, well,
zither in there, right?
Zither and hammer, dulcimer, and it's again, creating the tone of the movie was one of the biggest challenges. So it's a very, very special tone, and the music is very important for that. Now, having said that, Rachel's brother, Adam Horowitz, who's the music supervisor on this, he came on, and one of the best things he did was he asked me a question, which is, well, what's your favorite music? Because we were trying to figure out what are the songs? We're going to have songs as well as score. What are they? And I said, well, I really like ska. And that was the beginning. We had an argument between me and Michael that he wanted doo-wop, and I was like, I do not want doo-wop. And then Adam said, but actually ska has doo-wop in it. And actually we talked about how, that's one of the threads inside of ska. So we started listening to ska, and then we started like this wonderful vein opened up with all these wonderful artists. And it was a challenge to find the people that own the rights to the music, I can tell you, but it was very cool. And it made me happy because also, I don't know, it just felt like a little bit unusual for a film like this.
And that's probably why I associated the ska with Maggie, and also that it comes in at the beginning of the film.
And that's right. It's her, and in a way, it's also her lesson, because the ska has a beat that makes you say, that tells you everything's all right. Just calm down.
Right. Yes. So one of the other things about Maggie's plan is that for us to learn our lesson, it's not essential that Maggie learns hers. Change is, after all, pretty difficult. And in fact, we might need to watch this film several times in order to learn our lesson at full ticket price.
Yes, exactly.
But anyway, do you have any thoughts about that, about, I guess, the degree to which Maggie learns a lesson?
I think she feels that she learns a lesson. I think she feels like she's going to stop bossing everyone around. But as a little kid, as Tony's son says at the end, good luck with that bossy pants. Because the truth is, we are who we are, and we change a little bit. I've often thought, it's not that we go in circles, it's that we go in a spiral, and we keep, revisiting the same domain, but we might be a little bit above it, but we're still revisiting the same domain.
So can you talk a little bit about the development of your artistic sensibility and voice, going all the way back? I guess particularly as a film artist, but of course you're a fiction writer and a painter as well.
Well, my voice really, it was not a planned thing, actually. I had plans, but none of them worked out. For example, I was 100% sure I was going to be a painter. Realized to my chagrin that I wanted to make films at about 21. Started studying at the New School with this eccentric man called Arnold Eagle, who's a dyed-in-the-wool leftist who taught me the fundamentals of filmmaking. I never went back to school for it, but I started making films, short films, sort of more art films that didn't have sound and that were in a loop. Then started being interested, because I'd always written short stories, in combining those two and actually starting to make narrative films. Had a spate of about 5 years where I was in movies, because I needed money to make sculptures, and I thought, oh, maybe if I auditioned for some of these movies and I get them, I could get this money. And it was all kind of, I fell into things. Then I ended up getting cast by all these wonderful directors in all their worst movies, which was really a good thing, because that meant I didn't get famous as an actor, but at the same time, you know, I got to watch these people work, and there's nothing better than being a mole in a great filmmaker's set. So I did that for a few years. Meanwhile, I was writing my first feature film, Angela. Finally got it made after a couple of years of searching for money. And, you know, made it and brought it to Sundance, and then it won some prizes at Sundance, and then, you know, the thing is that I guess, that feeling of making things because you're curious about them, because you want to make them, that you want to see them made in the world, versus trying to fulfill some idea of like a market need or something, it's very deep in me. So it's sort of like, this is what I'm curious about now. Yeah. Maggie is what I'm curious about now. Yeah. And I'm very interested in character. I am a visual artist, so I tend to think, you know, of course, that's what film's so great at. It's like you have the character, but it's how you photograph that performance that's going to really transmit the full impact of emotion. Like, a person can be doing the best performance ever, and if you photograph them in a mediocre and ordinary way, well, then their performance will be somewhat diminished. If you photograph them in a way that heightens their performance, well, then you're making the most out of what they're giving you. So my kind of approach is very actor-centric, because I know perfectly well that I can't do anything without the actors, without what they're bringing. And I work very intensely with them for like a long time before we get there. But once we're on set, it's my responsibility to then frame them and light them in such a way that and what color is the wall? What color is their sweater? How does the sweater react with the wall? Like, what are those edges doing? And all those kind of things are part of my fun and my pleasure. So I'm kind of like following my nose. And like, for example, I'll pick up a book, and I don't know why I've picked up the book. And 2 years later, I find out why I picked up the book. I wrote a book called Jacob's Folly, which is partly about 18th century Jews in France, Paris. But 2 years before that, when I was shooting The Private Lives of Pip Belief, for some reason I wanted to read a book about the Marquis de Sade. Now why? I don't know. But it was very relaxing to me, strangely, to read this book about the Marquis de Sade when I was shooting this film. And then later it turned out, well, actually, I was really going to be interested in perverted aristocrats in 18th century France. But it was kind of like, so it's like, if you just listen to your unconscious, it bubbles up and tells you what to do.
Yeah, interesting. Of your 5 feature films to date, which do you feel comes closest to the vision you had in your head during the writing phase or pre-production?
Well, in some ways, this one, in the sense that we were very careful about how we planned the shots in this film, in part because we didn't have a huge amount of time, and we had a lot of scenes and a lot of locations, and we're shooting in New York. So we had 2 full drafts of an entire shot list for the entire film. We would get there at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, an hour before crew call, and work everything out, so that by the time everybody got there, we were really prepared. So in a sense, although I love surprise in terms of what's happening between the actors, in terms of how the thing looked and like the color and what, I would say that this was very intensely planned. So was The Private Lives of Pip Belief, but I would say that this one even more so. But still, there's always the element of surprise. If there wasn't, then I really wouldn't want to do this.
About that visual scheme, you want to talk a little bit about the quality of light you were looking for in certain settings, or the colors like you've mentioned. Were you coordinating that mostly to do with character, and what were the ideas behind those?
Well, creating a tone for a film like this is you know, there's a lot of elements, right? So one of them is, how do you create a world that's just like ours, but just a little bit lifted, just a little bit heightened? And part of that is color, right? So thinking about what color are walls, being bold. Maggie has red walls. Why? Because the person she's subletting from hasn't redecorated since 1976, and that's, you know, she's got the walls she's got. But then, so there's reasons behind it, so it's not just artful, but at the same time, you can make it work. The costumes, the way that Georgette is dressed sort of like a Viking princess, and yet it's also in mode. I mean, it's in fashion. She's very fashionable. She's wearing clothes that are very fashionable, but yet it's very much about her character, telling you about her character.
And there's a wintry quality to those scenes that are more about Georgette, am I right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And also the fact that everybody else has muted color, and Maggie's the one who really has a sense of color, a sense of, well, you can see all these colors that she's wearing, that there's, there was something that we cut out of the movie. There was this whole speech about chromophobes and chromophiles, and she's a chromophile, and you know, which is actually Michael Taussig theory about modern civilization. But anyway.
Maybe to wrap up, I'll ask about the cast and how you lighted on these particular players for these roles.
Well, you know, Julianne Moore is an old friend of mine, and I immediately thought about her, you know, for Georgette. And she and Greta kind of came on around the same time. I mean, I think that Julianne, the snow scene where she said, "Are we going to die here?" I think that's the thing that clinched it for her. she just couldn't resist doing that scene.
Yeah.
But when I met Greta, whom I didn't know personally, within 20 minutes I knew she was the right person for it, and we, you know, and so we cast her. And once I knew we had her, it was wonderful because like the heart of the movie was there. And then we had Julianne. We brought Ethan in a little bit later, but casting, of course, is hugely important to me. Bill Hader was an enormous gift to the film too, because you know, he's so solid. He's such a wonderful, wonderful actor, and he's really a very, very special actor. They all are. And Maya is also a friend of mine. So I called her and asked her if she wanted to do it, and she was really happy to do it. It's been my great blessing that actors want to work with me. Otherwise, I wouldn't get my movies made at all.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.